I caught him rehearsing a breakup speech, with his girlfriend and her best friend filming. She'll cry then start begging, he smirked. She'll say she can't live without me. Probably promise to change. She'll say she'll do anything, just don't leave. He talked. I listened. Then I slid an envelope across the table, signed, sealed, and witnessed. His smile faded fast. The camera caught it all as he opened it, and realized just how badly he'd underestimated me. I never planned to be early that day. Traffic on the interstate had been suspiciously light, and the lunch meeting with our potential investors wrapped up 40 minutes ahead of schedule. Walking through the quiet back entrance of our office building, I was already mentally rehearsing my exciting update for Colton. The Richardson deal was practically secured, just one more signature needed. After 3 years of brutal work weeks and financial gambles, we were finally about to break through. Before we continue, I want to take a moment to thank you for joining me on this journey of betrayal and reclamation. If you've ever felt underestimated or overlooked, this story might resonate deeply with you. Consider subscribing. It's completely free and connects you with others who appreciate these tales of quiet strength and calculated justice. Now let's return to the moment everything changed. That's when I heard my husband's voice drifting from the conference room, the door left slightly ajar. Something in his tone made me pause, an unfamiliar coldness I'd never heard him use at work. She'll cry then start begging, Colton was saying, his voice carrying a smirk I could practically visualize without seeing his face. She'll say she can't live without me. Probably promise to change. I froze, my hand gripping the strap of my leather messenger bag so tightly my knuckles turned white. Who was he talking about? My stomach twisted with a sick feeling I couldn't immediately identify. She'll say she'll do anything, just don't leave, he continued, his voice taking on a mocking tone that made my blood run cold. Instinct told me to stay hidden. I pressed myself against the wall beside the door, barely breathing as my husband continued. Riley's always been predictable like that. Remember when I wanted to move cross-country for business school? The waterworks started immediately. Same thing when I suggested selling her dad's lake house to fund the initial startup costs. My name. He was talking about me. The floor seemed to tilt beneath my feet, but something kept me rooted in place. The timing has to be perfect, Colton continued. Right after we sign with Richardson, but before the money hits our accounts. She'll be too emotional to think clearly about her stake in the company. A female voice responded, familiar in a way that made my skin crawl. And you're sure the prenup covers this scenario? Lydia. Our company's marketing director. The woman Colton had insisted we hire despite her limited experience. The woman who'd been spending late nights at the office with my husband while I traveled to secure the Richardson deal. Positive, Colton replied with casual confidence. When we got married, Riley was just the grieving daughter with a fat inheritance check. She had no idea what we were building. The prenup protects my business ventures. That's the exact wording. Her father's money was just the seed capital. My father had died just 6 months before I met Colton. The pain was still raw when he proposed a year later. Dad's insurance policy and the sale of his construction business had left me with nearly $2 million. Money I'd planned to invest carefully over decades. Instead, I'd invested it all in Colton's vision. In our vision, or so I'd thought. Honestly, another female voice chimed in. I'm impressed. You've got this plan down to the exact phrases she'll use. Molly. My college roommate. The woman who'd stood beside me at my wedding. The friend who'd cried with me on the anniversary of my father's death each year. I felt bile rise in my throat but forced it back down. My mind raced to catalog every interaction with Molly over the past months, searching for clues I'd missed. That's because I know exactly how she'll react, Colton continued, sounding almost bored now. She's never been particularly complicated. A soft laugh from Lydia. And you're sure you want me filming this? For prosperity. Posterity, Molly corrected. And yes, we need documentation of how she reacts when you tell her. If she tries anything funny with the company afterward. She won't, Colton interrupted. Riley avoids confrontation like the plague. Always has. She'll be too devastated to fight back. Something shifted inside me in that moment. A fundamental change in the foundation of who I was. The woman they were describing, the woman my husband thought he knew so thoroughly, began dissolving. In her place stood someone new, someone they hadn't accounted for in their careful calculations. I should have burst through the door. Should have screamed and demanded explanations. Instead, I silently took 3 steps backward, then turned and walked on trembling legs to the emergency exit stairwell. Only there, in the cold concrete enclosure, did I allow myself a single shuddering breath. My father had built his construction company from nothing, working 60-hour weeks for decades. Always understand the full blueprint before you start building, he'd told me countless times. Now, I needed the complete picture of what I was facing. Inside my office, I locked the door and sank into my chair, mind churning through every business document Colton and I had signed together. The prenuptial agreement I'd thought was a formality. The operating agreement for Meridian Tech that established ownership stakes. The Richardson contract waiting for signatures that would triple our company's value overnight. While my computer booted up, I slipped off my wedding ring and placed it on the desk. 3 carats of diamond that had once symbolized promise now looked like nothing more than a transaction cost. A down payment Colton had made on access to my inheritance. I opened our secure document server and began methodically downloading everything. Financial records, contracts, emails, meeting minutes. My hands worked steadily even as my mind struggled to process the betrayal. 3 years of marriage. 5 years of partnership. All of it built on calculations I hadn't been privy to. My phone buzzed with a text from Colton. How did Richardson meeting go? Home late tonight. Big project with marketing team. With Lydia. I typed back. Meeting great. Deal almost closed. Take your time tonight. As I hit send, a strange calm settled over me. Colton believed he had mapped out every possible reaction I might have, every emotional response to his practiced betrayal. He thought he knew exactly who I was and what I would do. But he had made a critical miscalculation. He had never actually seen me fight for something, because until now I'd believed we were fighting together. He'd never witnessed what I was capable of when cornered because he'd always positioned himself as my ally, never my opponent. I opened my contacts and scrolled to a name I hadn't called in months. Marcus Devereaux, my father's attorney. The man who had handled his estate and advised me on my inheritance. The man who had gently suggested a more thorough prenuptial agreement, which I had politely declined. Marcus? It's Riley Jensen. I need your help with something urgent and completely confidential. As I explained the situation, my voice remained steady, a stark contrast to the Riley that Colton had so confidently described in the conference room. The Riley who would cry, beg, and promise to change. That woman no longer existed. In her place stood someone with a clear objective and the resources to achieve it. Someone who understood now that trust was a luxury she could no longer afford, and that the only reliable blueprint was one she designed herself. I had 7 days until the Richardson deal closed. 7 days to rewrite the ending Colton thought was already written. Marcus Devereaux's office hadn't changed in the 5 years since I'd sat across from him discussing my father's estate. The same leather-bound law books lined mahogany shelves. The same understated art adorned the walls, and the same look of measured concern crossed his face as I laid out what I'd discovered. I need to understand exactly where I stand, I said, sliding my father's worn notebook across his desk. I'd kept meticulous notes since that day in the conference room, times, dates, verbatim quotes. And I need to know if there's anything I can do before he makes his move. Marcus studied my notes through reading glasses perched on his nose. Your father would be proud of your composure, Riley. Not many could maintain such clarity in your position. I don't feel composed, I admitted, the first crack in my voice since I'd entered his office. I feel like I'm playing a part in some terrible play. That's exactly what you're doing, Marcus nodded, reaching for our original business incorporation documents. And it's crucial you don't break character until we understand the full script. For 3 hours, we dissected every legal document connected to Meridian Tech. The initial seed funding agreement where I'd contributed $1.8 million from my inheritance. The operating agreement where Colton held 60% ownership despite my larger financial contribution. A concession I'd made because he'd convinced me his sweat equity and industry connections warranted the controlling interest. There's something odd here, Marcus said, tapping a paragraph in our quarterly financial report. These development costs for the Richardson project. They're nearly double what similar projects in your portfolio required. I leaned forward, studying the numbers. Colton said the increased costs were for specialized programming we needed to outsource. To which vendor? Marcus asked. A quick search revealed a company I'd never heard of, Parallax Solutions LLC. Founded 18 months ago with no website, no social media presence, and a business address that appeared to be a mail drop in Delaware. I need to know who owns this company, I said. Marcus nodded. I'll have my investigator look into it immediately. In the meantime, we need to secure copies of all banking records and tax filings. And Riley, his expression grew serious, you need to continue as if nothing has changed. The next morning I walked into our home kitchen where Colton was making coffee, his back to me. Every cell in my body wanted to confront him, to demand explanations for his betrayal. Instead I kissed his cheek and asked about his late night at the office. Productive, he said, handing me a mug. How are the Richardson preparations coming? Everything's on track, I replied, forcing myself to meet his eyes. Final presentation tomorrow, signatures by end of week. That's my girl, he said with a smile that once would have warmed me. Now I could only see calculation behind it. At the office I maintained my routine while conducting my covert investigation. During lunch breaks, I methodically photographed documents I couldn't digitally access. After hours I reviewed years of financial records, looking for patterns I'd missed while trusting Colton to handle the business side of our partnership. By Thursday, Marcus's investigator confirmed what I'd begun to suspect. Parallax Solutions was registered to Lydia's brother, with Colton as a silent partner. Nearly $400,000 of company funds had been funneled through this shell corporation for services never actually rendered. It's embezzlement, Marcus stated plainly during our clandestine meeting at a coffee shop 3 towns over. And it gives us leverage. Not enough, I said, stirring my untouched tea. He could claim ignorance of her brother's involvement. We need something irrefutable. That evening Molly called, her voice cheerful as she invited me to lunch the following day. Just us girls, she said. You must be stressed with the big deal closing. That would be great, I replied, amazed at how steady my voice remained. I could use a friend right now. The performance was exhausting. Each morning I dressed for battle in the guise of normal life. Each night I lay beside the man who was plotting my financial and emotional devastation, listening to his breathing while my mind worked through contingencies. On Friday morning, opportunity arrived in the form of document revisions for the Richardson contract. As Chief Operating Officer, Colton needed to sign off on last-minute changes before our closing meeting. Rushing between calls, he barely glanced at the papers I placed before him. Standard liability clauses, I explained truthfully, pointing to the highlighted sections that did indeed address liability. What I didn't mention were the additional pages tucked between those clauses. Documents Marcus had prepared authorizing transfer of intellectual property rights for our core technology from the company to me personally. In his haste and distraction, Colton signed them all. Thanks, babe, he said, already turning back to his call. I gathered the papers with steady hands, heart pounding as I walked them directly to the notary public who worked 2 floors down. With each signature she authenticated, my position strengthened. That afternoon, Marcus confirmed what these documents meant. Even if Colton maintained control of Meridian Tech as a business entity, the technology that made the company valuable now legally belonged to me alone. Any attempt to cut me out would render his company virtually worthless to Richardson or any other potential buyer. This is your safety net, Marcus explained, carefully storing the notarized documents in his briefcase. But we're still missing the smoking gun that proves his intent. As I drove home that evening, mental exhaustion threatened to overwhelm me. Maintaining this facade while dismantling Colton's plans piece by piece required a strength I hadn't known I possessed. At a red light, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Her eyes harder, her jaw set with determination my father would have recognized from his own face. My phone chimed with a text from Colton. Reservation tomorrow night. Steakhouse downtown. Celebrating our last dinner before becoming millionaires. I knew what he was planning. The restaurant, public enough to discourage a scene, private enough for his prepared speech. Lydia positioned nearby with her camera. The facade of celebration that would quickly transform into the end of our marriage. Little did he know I had my own plans for that dinner. My own envelope to slide across the table. I texted back a single word, perfect. Then I called Marcus with final instructions for preparing the documents that would become my counterstrike. After nearly 2 weeks of investigation, of pretending and planning, the endgame was finally in sight. I was no longer the grieving daughter with an inheritance to exploit. I was my father's child in every sense, methodical, strategic, and absolutely unwilling to be underestimated. Morning arrived with relentless sunshine streaming through our bedroom windows. Beside me, Colton scrolled through his phone, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Was he texting Lydia? Planning some final detail of my humiliation? I would never know, and strangely I no longer cared to. Richardson's team wants a final review meeting before the signing ceremony, I mentioned casually, sliding out of bed. I scheduled it for 11. Colton nodded absently. You handle it. I've got calls with potential investors all morning. Investors? I paused, one foot in our walk-in closet. We haven't discussed new investors. He glanced up, that familiar charming smile appearing too quickly. Just preliminary conversations. Getting our ducks in a row for the growth phase after Richardson. Of course, I replied, selecting a navy power suit I knew made me look authoritative. Smart thinking. Two could play the game of secrets. While he conducted his preliminary conversations, I would be shifting key client relationships to my direct management, a move I'd begun initiating days ago. The Richardson review meeting went smoothly, their legal team impressed with the thoroughness of our documentation. Colton had always been the face of these meetings, but today I took center stage, showcasing intimate knowledge of every project detail. Our clients seemed pleasantly surprised by my command of the technical aspects Colton had always insisted on handling. Your wife is quite the powerhouse, Richardson's CEO commented to Colton during a break. I watched his face carefully, noting the momentary tightening around his eyes. She's full of surprises, he replied, his hand finding the small of my back in a gesture that once felt protective but now felt possessive. After the meeting, I spotted Molly waiting in the lobby, her designer handbag clutched nervously in manicured fingers. Our scheduled lunch. The one where she was supposed to subtly gather intelligence on my emotional state before tomorrow's planned ambush. Ready for girl time? She called, her smile too bright. Absolutely, I replied, matching her false cheer as we walked to the upscale bistro around the corner. We ordered salads neither of us would eat and exchanged pleasantries about the weather. All the while I studied my former friend, the woman who had held my hand at my father's funeral, who had helped me pick out my wedding dress, who now sat across from me plotting my downfall. How are things with Colton? She finally asked, her tone practiced concern. You both seem so busy lately. I took a deliberate sip of water, placed the glass down precisely and met her eyes. It's interesting you should ask about Colton, I said quietly. I've been meaning to thank you. Her perfectly shaped eyebrows rose slightly. Thank me. For filming his rehearsal. The divorce speech practice. It was quite enlightening. All color drained from Molly's face. Her mouth opened, closed, then opened again like a fish suddenly finding itself on dry land. Riley, No need to explain, I interrupted, my voice steady despite the thundering of my heart. You've made your allegiances clear. I just have one question. He stared frozen. Was it worth it? Trading 15 years of friendship for whatever he promised you? Tears welled in her eyes. Genuine or another performance, I couldn't tell anymore. It's not what you think, she whispered. Lydia approached me. Said it would just be documentation in case you tried to take everything in the divorce. I didn't know he was planning to cut you out financially. But you knew he was planning to break my heart, I replied. And you were going to film it for posterity. She flinched at my deliberate use of the correct word, the one she had corrected Lydia on during their planning session. I'm sorry, she said, a tear tracking down her cheek. I placed cash on the table for my untouched meal and stood. Your apology is noted. And Molly? I wouldn't mention this conversation to Colton or Lydia. It would be unfortunate for your position at Williams and Marsh if your employers learned you were involved in corporate espionage. Her law firm had strict ethics policies, a fact she'd complained about during brunches over the years. Another piece of information freely given that I now wielded like a scalpel. That afternoon I met privately with our lead programmer Jason, who'd been with us since the beginning. He'd always reported to me operationally while taking technical direction from Colton. I need your complete honesty, I told him after closing my office door. Has Colton asked you to prepare any files for transfer? Client data, proprietary code, anything unusual? Jason's uncomfortable shift in his chair told me everything before he spoke. He asked me to create backup packages of our core architecture. Said it was for the Richardson deal. I nodded, careful to keep judgment from my expression. When did he request this? 3 weeks ago. And again yesterday. Said he needed them by tomorrow afternoon. Perfect timing for his planned exit strategy. I'd like you to prepare those packages as requested, I said calmly. But I need verified copies secured in our protected repository. Can you do that without raising suspicion? Jason studied me, loyalty warring with confusion. Is everything okay, Riley? It will be, I assured him. I'm just ensuring our intellectual property remains protected during this transition period. That evening in our empty house, I allowed myself 30 minutes of honest grief. Seated on the floor of our closet, surrounded by the material evidence of our shared life, I sobbed until my throat ached. I mourned not just the man I thought I'd married, but the future I'd believed in. Children growing old together, building something meaningful. When the 30 minutes ended, I washed my face, reapplied my makeup, and called the steakhouse to confirm our reservation for the following evening. Then I made a second call, requesting their private dining room instead of the main floor table Colton had booked. And could you accommodate 4 additional guests? I asked. It's a special business celebration. I invited Richardson and his CFO, knowing Colton wouldn't dare back out of his performance with such important witnesses present. I also invited 2 board members I trusted, people who had respected my father and who had substantial influence in our industry. The stage was perfectly set. As I prepared for bed that night, Colton emerged from the shower, towel wrapped around his waist. For a moment, watching him move through our bedroom with such familiar comfort, doubt crept in. Had I misunderstood? Was I overreacting? Then his phone buzzed on the nightstand. He lunged for it with unusual urgency, angling the screen away from me. Everything okay? I asked mildly. Just Lydia, he replied too casually. Final details for the Richardson signing ceremony. Ah, I nodded, turning away to hide my expression. Everything needs to be perfect tomorrow. On that point at least we completely agreed. The morning of what Colton believed would be his triumphant exit dawned bright and crisp. An autumn Saturday that smelled of possibilities, both endings and beginnings. I watched him dress with unusual care, selecting his lucky navy suit, the one he'd worn when we signed our first major client. Big day, he commented, adjusting his tie in the mirror, eyes never quite meeting mine in the reflection. Life-changing, I agreed, the double meaning lost on him as he checked his phone for the 5th time in as many minutes. While he headed to the office for last-minute preparations, I drove to Marcus's home, where we finalized the contents of my envelope. Each document had been carefully prepared, notarized, and strategically organized for maximum impact. Remember, Marcus advised as he slid the papers into a heavy cream envelope with my father's law firm's letterhead, timing is everything. Let him begin his speech, establish his intent clearly before the witnesses, then present your counter. I nodded, fingering the edge of the sealed envelope. And the Richardson team knows to remain neutral? They understand only that there may be an internal dispute that doesn't affect their acquisition of the technology rights, which, thanks to those documents Colton signed, now belongs solely to you regardless of company ownership. At 6:30 p.m., I arrived at Hawthorne's Steakhouse 15 minutes before our reservation. The maitre d' escorted me to the private dining room I'd arranged, its rich mahogany table set for 7, the empty chair beside mine a silent acknowledgement of what was to come. Richardson and his CFO arrived first, followed by the board members. Professional small talk filled the air as servers poured wine and described the evening's specials. I maintained perfect composure, discussing third-quarter projections and market expansions as if this were any normal business dinner. At precisely 7:02 p.m., Colton entered, momentarily freezing when he saw the assembled group. Surprise, I said, rising to kiss his cheek. I thought we should celebrate properly, with the people who helped make this deal possible. His recovery was impressive, the charming smile appearing as he shook hands and accepted congratulations. But I caught the flash of panic in his eyes, the subtle glance toward the main dining room where, undoubtedly, Lydia waited with her camera. "When did you arrange this?" he asked through clenched teeth as we took our seats. "Yesterday," I replied calmly. "I know how much you appreciate a good dramatic setting." Dinner proceeded with excruciating normalcy. The stakes were perfect, the wine flowed generously, and business conversation dominated. Beneath the table I felt Colton's leg bouncing with nervous energy. Twice he checked his watch and once he excused himself, to text Lydia, I presumed. As dessert menus were presented, I caught a glimpse of movement near the private room's partially open door. Molly stood in the hallway, pretending to examine a painting while clearly monitoring our table. Behind her, half hidden by a decorative plant, Lydia clutched what appeared to be her phone, positioned for recording. So they'd adapted their plan. The audience had changed, but the performance would proceed. Colton cleared his throat, setting down his untouched dessert menu. His posture shifted subtly as he turned toward me, ignoring our dinner guests. This was it, the moment he'd rehearsed, the speech he'd practiced while being filmed. "Riley," he began, his voice taking on that practiced, gentle tone I now recognized as completely artificial. "There's something I've been wanting to talk to you about. Something important." Richardson glanced up, confusion crossing his face at the sudden personal turn in conversation. "I've been doing a lot of thinking lately," Colton continued, "about us, about where we're headed." I noticed his eyes dart quickly toward the door where Lydia had shifted position, her phone now clearly visible as she recorded. The board members exchanged uncomfortable glances, sensing the inappropriate timing of what appeared to be a personal conversation. "I think we both know things haven't been right between us for a while," Colton pressed on, committed now to his script despite the unexpected audience. "We've grown apart. Become different people." He paused, a practiced moment of apparent reflection that I now recognized as calculated. "I think it would be best if we separated. Ended our marriage before we start resenting each other." The table fell silent. Richardson's CFO stared intently at his water glass. One board member began to rise, clearly uncomfortable, but I gestured subtly for him to remain seated. "I know this is difficult to hear," Colton continued, reaching for my hand across the table in a gesture that looked caring but felt mechanical. "You might feel like you can't live without me right now. You might even promise to change, to be different. To do anything, just don't leave." I supplied, quoting his rehearsal verbatim. His rhythm faltered, eyes widening slightly before he recovered. "Something like that, yes. But I've made up my mind. It's better this way. Cleaner." I allowed 5 seconds of perfect silence to fill the room, feeling the weight of our guest's discomfort and Colton's growing confidence that his plan, though modified, was working. Then I reached into my purse and withdrew the cream envelope. "I prepared something for this moment," I said, my voice steady as I slid it across the white tablecloth toward him. "Something I think you should see before you continue." Confusion crossed his face. This wasn't part of his script. His hand hesitated before taking the envelope, the heavy paper making a soft sound as he broke the seal and withdrew the contents. "What is this?" he murmured, scanning the first document. "That," I replied clearly enough for everyone to hear, "is a complete accounting of the funds diverted from Meridian Tech to Parallax Solutions, the shell company you created with Lydia's brother." His face paled as he flipped to the next document. "That's the intellectual property transfer you signed last week, giving me sole ownership of our core technology patents." His hands began to tremble slightly as he continued through the stack. "And that," I said as he reached the final pages, "is a copy of the video recording where you practiced this exact breakup speech, discussing how predictably I would beg and cry, while Lydia filmed and Molly coached you on what to say." At the doorway I heard a sharp intake of breath. Lydia had lowered her phone, her face a mask of shock visible through the partially open door. "You might want to invite your audience to join us properly," I suggested to Colton, whose face had transformed from confident to ashen. "Since they went to such trouble to document this moment." For several excruciating seconds, the only sound in the private dining room was the soft classical music drifting from hidden speakers. Colton stared at the documents, his fingers gripping the pages so tightly they crumpled at the edges. When he finally looked up, the charming mask had completely fallen away, revealing something ugly and desperate beneath. "You had no right," he hissed, voice barely audible. "I had every right," I replied evenly. "As your wife, your business partner, and the person who funded the very company you were planning to steal from me." With visible reluctance, Lydia and Molly entered the room, the recording phone now lowered to Lydia's side. Richardson and our board members watched with undisguised fascination as this corporate drama unfolded before them. "Mr. Richardson," I said, turning to our most important client with perfect composure, "I apologize for this unexpected theater during our celebration dinner. However, I believe transparency is crucial at this juncture." Richardson, a seasoned businessman who had weathered his share of corporate conflicts, merely nodded. "Please continue, Mrs. Jensen. 3 weeks ago, I accidentally overheard my husband rehearsing how he would end our marriage immediately after securing your contract but before the money transferred." I gestured toward Lydia. "With his girlfriend filming and my former friend providing feedback on his performance." Lydia flinched at the word girlfriend, her eyes darting nervously to the board members whose approval could make or break careers in our industry. "What she's not telling you," Colton interrupted, desperation edging into his voice, "is that she's been manipulating company documents behind my back. She's the one committing fraud." "Actually," I said calmly, sliding another document from my portfolio, "I have here the forensic accounting report detailing exactly how $427,000 was diverted from Meridian Tech to Parallax Solutions, a shell company registered to Ms. Campbell's brother with you as silent partner." One of the board members, Janet Whitmore, reached for the report. A retired CFO with a reputation for ethical business practices, Janet had been my father's friend and mentor. Her expression hardened as she scanned the numbers. "These diversions began 18 months ago," she noted, looking up at Colton with unveiled disappointment. "Shortly after the Series B funding round closed." Colton's jaw worked silently, his eyes darting between the faces surrounding him, searching for an ally and finding none. "This is a misunderstanding," he finally managed, regaining some composure. "Riley's upset about personal matters and she's confusing them with regular business operations." "Am I?" I asked, nodding toward Richardson's CFO. "Robert, would you consider payments to a shell company for services never rendered regular business operations?" Robert shook his head grimly. "We would call that embezzlement." "This is ridiculous," Lydia suddenly interjected, finding her voice. "You're all taking her word based on some creative accounting? Colton built this company from nothing. He's the visionary here." "The visionary with my father's money," I corrected quietly. "And as for taking my word," I gestured toward her phone, "why don't you share the recording you were just making? Or better yet, the practice session where Colton rehearsed exactly how I would beg and cry when he left me." Molly, who had remained silent and ashen by the door, suddenly spoke. "I have it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The original video. I kept a copy." All eyes turned to her as she pulled out her own phone with trembling hands. "I'm sorry, Riley. This went too far." Colton lunged for Molly's phone, but Richardson's security detail, who had been standing discreetly by the door, moved between them with practiced efficiency. "That's enough," Richardson said firmly. "Mrs. Jensen, while I appreciate your transparency, I must ask, how does this affect our contract?" "It doesn't," I assured him. "The intellectual property rights you're acquiring were legally transferred to me personally last week." Mr. Jensen signed the documents himself. I nodded toward the papers still clutched in Colton's hand. "The deal proceeds as planned, with payments directed to the appropriate holding company outlined in our agreement." Richardson studied me thoughtfully before nodding. "Then we'll proceed with the closing as scheduled Monday morning." "You can't do this," Colton said, his voice now deadly quiet, all pretense abandoned. "Everything I built." "We built," I corrected. "And I'm not taking it all. The company structure remains intact, minus the embezzlement and the shell corporations. You'll retain your shares as originally agreed, 40% to my controlling 60%. Janet's eyebrows rose approvingly. She understood what I was doing, protecting the business while ensuring Colton couldn't claim I'd acted out of pure vengeance. "The only difference," I continued, "is that I'll be assuming the role of CEO effective immediately, with all financial oversight returning to proper channels." For the first time that evening, Colton looked truly defeated. Not angry, not calculating, but hollow, as if he couldn't comprehend how thoroughly his plans had unraveled. "You won't last 6 months running this company," he said flatly. "You don't have what it takes." I smiled then, not with malice but with genuine certainty. My father built a construction empire with nothing but determination and integrity. I've inherited both. The dinner concluded shortly afterward, our guests departing with handshakes and meaningful glances. Lydia slipped away during the commotion. Molly lingered last, her tear-streaked face a portrait of regret. "For what it's worth," she said softly, "I'm sending you the video. Use it however you need to." I nodded once, neither accepting nor rejecting her attempted amends. 3 months later I sat in my father's old leather chair, the one I'd moved into the CEO office at Meridian Tech. The Richardson deal had closed successfully, infusing the company with capital that fueled our expansion into 2 new markets. Colton had resigned his operational role but remained a silent shareholder, his lawyer communicating his decision to avoid contested divorce proceedings in exchange for the settlement I'd proposed. The wall behind my desk, once bare, now held my father's framed motto: "Understand the full blueprint before you start building." Beside it hung the original business plan for Meridian Tech, written in my handwriting with my father's feedback penned in the margins. A knock at my door preceded Janet's entrance. After the dinner revelation, she had agreed to serve as interim CFO while we restructured. "Final numbers for the quarter," she announced, placing a folder on my desk. "We're up 17% from projections." I smiled, feeling a sense of peace that had been building gradually over the past months. The grief of betrayal hadn't disappeared, it had transformed into something useful. Wisdom, caution, strength. "Have you decided about the West Coast expansion?" Janet asked, settling into the chair across from me. I opened my father's blueprint tube, extracting the architectural plans I'd been reviewing. We're breaking ground next month. Not just on a new office building but on my future. One I was designing myself, with clear eyes and hard-earned knowledge of exactly what I was capable of surviving, and more importantly, what I was capable of building from the ashes of betrayal. If this story of reclaiming power resonated with you, please hit subscribe. It's free and helps support more stories like this. Leave your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever found strength when someone underestimated you? Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.